All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. So, we have a really great talk with Monica D. Higgins and her book. We're going to talk about her book, Remodel Success, which I have right here.
All right.
Um, so, please, there's also a link at the bottom that says purchase now so you can get a copy of the book for yourself. So, my name is Trisha Forey, and I have a company. It's called Forey and Co. And we focus on investment sales and investments. And we're based in Baltimore, and we also have some work that we do in Washington D.C. And my big push, I am in sales and I am in real estate, but I think it's also very important to educate people. So there's a lot of different events I've been doing with different people in the industry that can provide some information on the process of renovating, what goes into real estate, and what you need to do to be successful. There's a lot of things on TV now with HGTV and all these different shows out there that kind of show you in 20 minutes, they show you, a quick snippet of how it could be, but there's a lot of different players involved. There's a lot of money involved, and there can be pitfalls that, you can easily run into, but there are ways to avoid them. So one thing that I thought was cool is to start a book club. I love to read. And so we reached out to Monica and she obliged, and we are happy to have her here with us today. So I will let Monica introduce herself, and then from there, we'll just get into, I have a couple questions about the book, but Monica, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Trish. When she called me, I was like super excited just to have a book club, especially now that we are social distancing. So being able to get together as a group and talk about books is wonderful. Yeah. So as you mentioned, my name is Monica D. Higgins. And the D is important because my dad used to say my middle name was Delightful and DeLovely. It's really neat. But I was inspired to write Remodel Success because of my mother's experience. The year after my father died, my mother got taken big time by a shady contractor. And I reflected on that experience and like what happened? And as I looked upon that experience and spoke with other homeowners, I realized that they were not setting themselves up for success. And hence, that's how the book was born. I own a construction management firm, Renovation Planners, and also Garagify, which is a design build firm for backyard homes.
Wow, awesome. Awesome. So now were you already in the real estate field before? Because I read that you sold real estate before as well.
Yes, I'm a former real estate sales licensee, salesperson. I was never designated as a realtor, but I always found myself when I was showing homes, like, wow, what can we do to make this better, make it flow better? And I realized I was more interested on the remodeling side of things, and I wasn't selling it. So
okay, cool. So you were already in this space, and so, but what really spurred you to get into what you're into now is your mom's experience with the shady contractor. Talk about some of the pitfalls that she experienced.
Well, one thing is not a lack of proper pre-planning. She was planning as she went along, and it's all about doing the right steps in the right order, but you have to make sure that you're planning, because what your goal is that when you start construction, you want to go, 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 not stop, go, stop, go. So that was one of the things. Obviously, she selected the wrong contractor, and I think it has to do with the fact that many homeowners just ask 3 questions. Who are you? Are you licensed? And how much is it going to cost me? And even if you do get references, I mean, let's be honest, who's going to give you a bad reference? Like nobody is going to give you a reference to say, call them, and that person's going to say something bad about them. Yeah. That doesn't happen. But it's a matter of asking critical questions of contractors, because you want to know about their experience, of course, the communication style, their problem-solving skills, because if something doesn't go according to plan, how they handle that, because that's critical. Because really, no matter how well you plan something, there's always going to be something that's a little off kilter. So you want to ask questions to help determine how they get back on track. How do they even schedule projects? Because that's important. How do they budget, prepare the bid? Those are important pieces of information. I'm in California, and I was surprised that for general contractors to take the test, like estimating and scheduling is not something that they're tested on. And that is really critical.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So my experience, especially I work in residential real estate, is that, like you said, people do want to kind of go. But when I was going through your book, it seems like almost the pre-planning stage, the stage before you talk to the contractor, like knowing what it is that you want.
Yes.
Like that's in depth. But then also once you start to interview the contractor, like that's also in depth. So can you just give us some information on how do you get organized before you even speak to the contractor? And then from there, once you have that organized, then what happens once you meet the contractor?
Sure. So let's think about the way that homeowners typically start a project. Oh, I want to remodel my kitchen. The first call that they make is to the contractor. He or she comes over. You're telling them a story of what you want, and then you want them to give you a number. They're hesitant to give you a number because A, they don't have all the information.
Exactly.
And whatever number they give, they know, but by the time that you're actually ready to get a bid, the scope of work has gone from this to this.
Yeah.
We want them to keep the number like this.
Yeah.
So don't make the first call to a contractor.
Okay.
My suggestion is to, first of all, figure out what it is that you want. But really detail, like saying you want to remodel your kitchen doesn't mean anything. What are the details? Are you just refacing the cabinets, or are you tearing everything out? Are you moving walls? Are you moving plumbing? There's a whole bunch of details, thousands of details that go into remodeling a kitchen. So you want to be clear on what that is. And in the first chapter of the book, which is about the visioning, think of the vision as the sun, and every aspect of your project is the rays. So if you get clear on this, everything else will be clear. And you want to be able to describe your project, not just tell a story. You want to be able to have documents so that when it's time to get bids, you have the construction documents that have been drawn up by your architect or designer. That person is going to involve a structural engineer, for example, as an example. But you have all the critical details, because that's the information that the contractor needs to give you a realistic bid.
Yeah.
The other thing is people, when it comes to when they do get bids, they're price conscious, which is fine, but they're looking at bids and, oh, this one's $30,000 lower, I should go with that bid. The question to ask is, why is it $30,000 lower? Is it the same scope of work? Do they look at all the details? What's the level of finish materials? Those are the ask.
Yeah, that's great. And then you talked about also, so before you even meet with the contractor, you need to be meeting with your architect and or a designer. Can you just give us the differences between the architect and the designer? How do you know which one to meet with, and then what you should expect from them to present to your contractor?
Okay. So in terms of an architect, they're licensed with an architecture degree. They typically have interned with an architecture firm because that's part of the licensing requirement.
Right.
They have to pass the professional exam. They're relatively more expensive because they have that level of education.
Yep.
But they typically draw plans that involve adding square footage or affecting the structural integrity of the building. A designer, on the other hand, is not typically licensed, though they may be. They may have a design degree. The experience is going to vary. They're relatively less expensive because they don't have that level of education. And they would not be able to draw plans for adding square footage or adding structural integrity. Where they sort of overlap in terms of their skill sets or what the services they offer would be in regards to developing floor plans, interior details, helping you select finishes like the tile or the wood flooring, paint selection, door hardware. So that would kind of be like an overlap.
Okay.
For those. And a designer would take it further, perhaps in terms of helping you select furniture, drapery, wall coverings, that sort of thing. The architect is going to be more thinking about building materials. exterior materials, windows and doors, life safety, making sure it's done to code, energy calculations to make sure it's compliant with Title 24. I don't know if you have that where you are, but we have it in California. But those, and of course, the permitting process.
Okay. That's great. There was also something in your book where you had talked about, I can't remember how you phrased it, but almost making repairs now, or doing like, are there some renovations or upgrades in terms of, energy green savings that may cost a little bit more, but then save you some money down the line? I think sometimes in residential real estate, people are so cost conscious that it's like, you're right. If this is cheaper, then I'm going to go with this. But if you could just talk a little bit about, it also depends on the type of project that you're working on. But if you're renovating a house and you're going to be there, say, for another 10 years, what are certain things that you just can't skimp on? And even if they cost more money, what are some of the things in renovations that can save people, that they may have to pay up front more, but it can save them more on the long term?
Well, let's just think about the average age of a home in the United States. I think it's like 50 or 60 years old minimal. Okay. So a lot of those homes don't have insulation the way that would be insulated today. So you would definitely, well, the code's going to require you to do it anyway, but you would definitely want to take care of that, because that's going to help lower your energy bills.
Exactly.
For example, in the state of California, for all new construction, solar is mandated. So for some people, there's ways to there's certain exceptions to that, but you want to look at what your return on investment is. So yes, you're investing in the solar panels, but how much is that going to save you on your utility bills over time? Things such as like rain barrels that can capture the rainwater, and you can use it to irrigate your garden. So you already got, the water was free from the rain. And you're going to irrigate your garden without turning on the sprinklers or turning on the hose. Those are just three easy things to think about. But it could be a matter of the window placement. So how can you maximize daylighting? So you're getting more daylight in there. Oh no. Yeah.
Glitch.
No worries. Yeah. We're going.
Okay.
So every project is different, and every homeowner has different needs, like what their intrinsic motivation is. It's funny because I'm actually a LEED accredited professional, which is a green building designation, and I got that in 2007. And I did it thinking that green was going to be a driver of projects for homeowners, and honestly, it's not. People look at their kitchen and like, oh man, I don't like this kitchen. That's the driver. And then we have the conversations about the green, but they're more about the function and the flow of, how it looks.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So no, I think there was a big push, and it might still be on green. And I think people are just kind of, it's still a push. I see people that are into solar, but I have one client, and they had these solar panels. I think they were Tesla solar panels, and she was just like, she wanted to rip them out. Like, she didn't want it, but it was because of the aesthetic of it, So it is, I guess, interesting to think about those different types of things.
Yeah.
But, so talk about, so now you've met with the architect, you got your plans, or you met with the designer, you have everything laid out, you know what's going on in each space, you have the space planning basically figured out. So now you're talking to different contractors. Can you talk a little bit about the different types of bids? I think you had named in the book 3 different types of bids you can get in terms of fixed, maximum. Just talk a little bit about the different type of bids that people can see, and just give us a little bit of information on how somebody can recognize what type of bid they're being presented with.
Okay. So one would be a cost plus contract. So basically the cost of all the materials, that the building materials and the finished materials, and then the contractor is going to charge you X% over that. It sounds like, oh, that's a way to save money, but being able to, you as the homeowner, tracking all that just to making sure that everything the contractor has purchased, what they say the cost is the cost is. So you're gathering the receipts. unless you're like a CPA and want to be, the bean counter, it's a lot of work to do it that way.
Okay.
So a guaranteed maximum price contract is that the contractor is looking at the scope of work and it will provide you with a guaranteed maximum based on that scope. However, if there's anything that unforeseen conditions, so maybe you open up a wall and you have mold damage. I mean, obviously you're not going to leave it there, so that would be a change order.
Yes.
But you're going to guarantee a maximum, and you don't know. I mean, you as a homeowner don't know what the cost is, so whatever the maximum is, whatever the difference is, I mean, that's what they get to keep. Or what we typically see is a fixed price contract, subject to changes, of course. Okay. So a contractor will view the plans, give you a bid. You'll typically see the line item for overhead and profit, but that's the fixed price that they're going to charge you. Again, if there are changes to the scope of work, then the contract amount will increase or decrease based on that, along with the schedule. I think it's easy for people to understand the fixed price contract.
Okay.
And that's why it's common. The cost plus, as I said, it sounds good, but it's a lot of work to be on top of it, unless you have somebody that's just going to be looking at the purchases and logging them in and making sure that, reconciling everything.
Okay. So a couple of different options that people can kind of go over. And I guess once people are on with this knowledge, they can ask, if they're not sure, they can ask their contractor, hey, what type of contract is this, or what contract is that? Because I see different type of contracts, but I don't think people really, they don't know, it's like whatever contract they get, they just kind of think this is what it is. Because do you work with a lot of investors, or a lot of the people that you're working with, is this like the one renovation project that they're doing every 8 to 10 years? Do you have a lot of, because I think that also creates a difference too, depending on if somebody is doing this once or twice a year versus somebody who is doing this, once every 8 years. It's a bigger thing.
Right. So my clientele is typically a homeowner. I think I've had 1 or 2 investors.
Okay.
Over the period of time, it is typically homeowners.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So now you've met with the architect, you met with the space planner, you are bidding the contractor. What contractor do you go with? And then from there, once you actually sign with them, do you just hand them over some money and say, let's get started? How does the schedule go? How do you start to schedule things?
Okay. My suggestion is, unless you're working with a design build firm, if you're gonna hire a contractor that's not doing the design, my suggestion is, before the architect submits the plans to the city, that you have a contractor review in terms of constructability, and also making sure that it's designed to budget. Because what happens is, a lot of times people will go through the whole permitting process and they're not getting a realistic idea of what the costs are until they start getting a bid, and that's not the time for you to figure out that, whoa, this is what I can afford. So my suggestion is to perhaps start the contractor interview process sooner rather than later, so that you can get that person's feedback in regards to constructability and cost. But once you do have, as you're considering contractors, you have to think about a couple of things. Well, it's not a couple, it's actually a lot, but it's not that simple. You want to make sure, the obvious points are, are you licensed for states that require licensing? Of course. So you want to check that. Most license board will probably have a database online where you can check it to make sure it's current.
Yep.
If they carry the appropriate insurances, that would be up there. Yep. You also want to ask questions in regards to, have they even done this kind of a project? So if you're hiring a contractor that just does new construction for a kitchen remodel, it's not that that person can't do it, but it may not be their wheelhouse. So, because new construction is a different animal than renovation within an existing space, existing footprint. So you want to know about their experience. You want to know about, obviously you're going to ask for references And again, they're not going to give you somebody that's going to say something bad about them, but you definitely want to talk to those people, and if so, visit their job site or their project to see like something that's maybe currently in construction, something that was done 5 years ago, and maybe something that was done 10 years ago. So you can kind of see how things held up over time. You want to consider how many projects they work on at once. So it's fine that they work on more than one project at once, but the critical question to ask is, what's the resources in terms of human capital so that they can efficiently work on projects to get them done? Not like, okay, they have one team, they start a job, and then they hop over to another job, and they don't get back to you for several days. So it's stop and go on their end because they don't have enough people to help them out.
They don't have the bandwidth.
Exactly. Let's see. And I guess in terms of communication style, like when you're sitting with someone, and keep in mind that the contractor is interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them to see if you're a good fit. So their communication style. So if you feel like they're not listening, that's probably not the contractor to work with. If they are, I hear this from a lot of women in particular, is that the contractor sort of talks down to them as if that person doesn't know anything, and that person may not know a lot, but that's not the way to treat your customer. So that's probably not a good thing. And you have your intuition, like your gut says, something, you can't quite put your finger on it. Go with your intuition.
I think those are all great tips. And just to kind of rewind a little bit, I think it's really important to visit people's work sites, but it's like, sometimes if you haven't done a lot of projects, you don't know what to look for on somebody's work site to see if it even, like if they're mid-project and say, hey, I'm working on this project on ABC Street, come and take a look at it. One thing that, and share some tips, please share some tips as well. But one thing I've noticed is like, I have a contractor that I work with now. And one thing that I like about him is that he keeps the site like relatively like neat and orderly. I've been to some sites and it's just, of course, if you're in the middle of demolition or if you're in the middle of whatever, it's going to be messy. But like at the end of the week or at the end of like whenever you're walking through, it's like stuff shouldn't be disorganized. And then it's like, if you have a general contractor and the subs are there, I mean, it's a work site, so there is a order to the way things are done, but there's also an order. You can tell when somebody's in control and the subs are really kind of like, they have some direction. But can you just give us some input on when somebody goes to a job site maybe they're in the middle of construction, how do you know if that job site is organized, disorganized? How do you know if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Well, in terms of being organized, like if having a clean job site is important to you, and they know that you're coming and it's not a clean job site, yes, if you're doing demolition, that's an exception. But let's just say that they're in the middle of framing, as an example, and things are not organized in a way that makes you feel comfortable. That may not be, the contractor for you. In terms of, you're not going to be able to look at the work to see that it's done correctly. I think it'd be a matter of observing the subs to see if there's, like if the general contractor's there and they have questions and they're asking the general contractor questions, that means that they have a good working relationship, in my opinion. And they're getting clarity to move forward. Because sometimes, the details on the plans may not be that clear. So they need to get some clarity before moving forward. I'd rather they ask the question than do what they think it said, and then it's not right.
So, and what about no permits? If you're walking around the job site and they're putting up mechanicals and there's no permits anywhere?
Well, I don't work with contractors that don't pull permits. So I know some homeowners want to do that, and because it's going to save them money, blah, 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 it's under the radar. But they have to think about the implications of not pulling permits. So let's just say you had some electrical work done without permits and you have a fire, okay? Your insurance company is not going to pay the claim.
It's as simple as that.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, you want to take that risk.
Because people always say, well, what's the issue with not pulling permits? Or I've heard contractors say, well, I don't really want to pull a permit, or we cannot pull the permit. It will save some time, but it's like, save some time. It just adds more risk,
Right. So, everybody has a different, different risk tolerance. I, for one, like if a homeowner wanted to work with a contractor, somebody that was not licensed and somebody didn't have the appropriate insurance and didn't pull permits, that's not my client.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Talk a little bit too about, you said you work with a lot of homeowners, and in your book you talked about getting a home inspector. You said most people think of a home inspector as someone that only is working with buyers and sellers, but what can a home inspector do to someone that's maybe, or how can they help a person that's been in the house for 10, 15 years? The person's like, well, I know my house. So what can that home inspector do to also help them in the process?
So yes, when you purchased your home 10 or 15 years ago, yes, you had a home inspection, but a lot has happened in that house over the last 10 to 15 years.
Right.
If only the walls could talk, but they don't. You want to have a home inspector come in and kind of give you the state of your house, because you're going to have a list of must-haves and you're going to have a list of nice-to-haves as far as what you want to do as far as a remodel. And there's probably going to be something as a result of the home inspection that you're going to have to put on your must-have list that you need to budget for, which may mean that if it's on your must-have list here and you have your nice-to-have, and depending on what the budget is, you may have to shift something from the must-have to the nice-to-have to make sure that gets done.
Yeah. I think that's 100% true. You said a lot. I mean, a lot can change, and it's like, when you're living in a house, you see what's going on walls in, but like, I've been in a couple of houses where you start taking the walls down, and then you find all this mold in the property. And then that just becomes, that's another cost.
Exactly. In that situation, a home inspector is not going to open up a wall, but perhaps there is a situation where they can detect the water leak because there's some sort of evidence of it.
Yeah.
So you would want to look into it further.
Yeah. So once you get past all that, you're going through the scheduling. Another thing you had talked about in your book was that I guess there was a time when it was like people were paying, 1/3 up front, 1/3 now.
Oh yeah.
1/3 when you finish. That, the money is the huge thing in the renovation process. So how do you correlate the payment schedule and then also set good milestones for, I'm going to pay you $5,000 and the next payment will come at A, B, and C? How do you kind of coordinate that and get clear on that, so you're not like just overpaying and you don't have anything to hold the contractor onto if he runs off?
Yeah, let me tell you, that's a great segue into the story. So I was called in to help a client. She was already working with a contractor, and unfortunately her husband died during construction.
Oh, wow.
And so she was left to carry on, and things with the contractor just weren't moving forward in the way that she thought. So I was brought in to help her. And the first thing I asked questions like, okay, well, where are you with the payments? Where are you with the work? You're supposed to be done now, but they haven't ordered the kitchen cabinets yet. Well, you can't be done in 2 weeks because they haven't been ordered.
Wow.
But when I did basically a forensics of her payments and the milestones, she had paid 75% of the work, but only 45% had been done. So there was really no incentive for the contractor to work in a timely manner.
Yeah.
So we definitely needed to get the work to catch up to the payments, and which we did. But that was just like, oh my God. I was like, oh my gosh. But the way the way the contractor had the contract written was that he was supposed to get paid at the start of the work. And it really should be, the milestone should be at the completion of the work.
In arrears.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like in California, the down payment, it's either 10% or $1,000, whichever is less at the signing of the contract. And then the contractor would have a payment schedule. You just want to make sure that the payment schedule aligns with the work being completed. So if they are requesting payment at demolition, it shouldn't be 50% because 50% of the work for the whole project shouldn't be done, but if it should be a percentage that makes sense for that time. And you want to keep going down till you get to the end, so that at least by the time you're making your last payment, it might be 15% the last payment. So you're dangling a little carrot there. And you definitely want the payments not to get ahead of the work.
Now, you said in California, I just want to make sure I heard this right, that the down payment is 10% of the job cost or $1,000, whichever one is less.
Correct.
Okay, so basically in California, the contractors that are working the jobs, they need to have their business in place where they can float money.
Yes, though there's exceptions, like if you're having custom work done. So maybe you're having like custom cabinetry as an example. So you can ask for a down payment towards that. But yes, it would be good business practice for them to be able to carry some of the cost of the project. But keep in mind that they're not in the business to be your creditor.
Right.
So
right.
You want to have a happy contractor and happy crew, and that requires, paying them on time. But on the flip side, you want to make sure that you're protected as a homeowner, and you want to make sure that, oh yes, once this is done, then I will pay you.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that even myself, I have got kind of caught up in. It's you want the project to move on, but it's like, if somebody can't, I mean, and I want to pay everybody. Yeah, they're not in the business of being my creditor, but it's like, if you can't go a week with the guys working, and then once the work is done, get paid, now I know that's a red flag. So can you give us like maybe, and anybody, if they have any questions, please put them in the question box, because I know it's a lot of information, but it's a lot of good information. But just give us like Monica's, I know in your book you have Monica's tips, but maybe give us Monica's, and there's good contractors. I don't want to talk about all these pitfalls, but give us maybe 5 red flags that when you see it, and when you see it, you should almost pause a little bit and say, you know what, let me rethink before I hand over a check. Just give us like Monica's red flags.
Okay, so I want you to think of contractors in 2 different buckets. There are those that want to do the job. There's those that want to get the job.
Okay.
The contractors that want to get the job are going to bid unrealistically low, knowing that, people are always looking at the lowest number. You're going to sign a contract and they're going to jack up the price later because it could be that the scope of work wasn't detailed and they'll, jack up the price later. Those that want to do the job, they are going to bid realistically. And if there's something in the plans that are not clear, they're going to want to ask for clarifications so that they can bid accurately. So think of those 2 things. Again, when you're looking at bids, don't just look at the bottom line. It's important to know what goes into the bottom line. So when you need to look at bids on an apples to apples comparison. Yeah. So if you have 3 bids, you want to make sure that the scope of work is the same and the details that are included in the same, or the level of finished materials. So does somebody have laminate countertops versus quartz countertops in the bid? Because that makes a difference in terms of the overall price. Getting back to the communication style with the contractor. So you need to figure out what's important to you in terms of communication. Yes, you have direct conversations, but is email, phone, or text? Like, what's your primary source of communicating with you? Or ideally, they would have construction management software where you can just log in and see what's happening. there's a to-do list or they have questions, everything's in one portal versus a whole bunch of back and forth via text and email.
Yeah.
The other thing I would recommend is to have, make sure the contractor, when you're asking the questions about their problem solving skills, don't ask a question like, you want to ask behavioral questions. So don't ask yes or no questions, because that's not going to give you any insight.
Right.
You want to ask questions like, here's a yes or no question. So have you ever had a project that didn't get completed on time? If they said yes, I mean, that's great, but I might question that, because, so the question I would ask is, well, how did you handle a project that didn't get completed on time?
Right.
And then you want to hear, A, how it was handled, but more importantly, what was the cause of the delay? Was it on the contractor side, or it could have been on the homeowner side, or maybe the engineer side or the city side. But you want to get the underlying layer in terms of the why.
The why.
So questions that are open-ended, so you can further assess the response.
Okay, awesome. The last question I have is basically, I think you started off your book with this and you talked about change orders. And I don't remember the exact number, I wrote it down, but you said change orders, change orders can almost change the price. It was either by like 30 or 50%, or, but talk a little, I talk a little bit about change orders and how it can be on the contractor, but it also can be on the client. So how can you make yourself a successful client and not run up your budget as well?
Well, it all goes back to careful pre-planning. What happens is that a lot of times when you're planning, when you're in the design phase, I strongly recommend that you incorporate 3D rendering, because a lot of people can't read a floor plan and kind of see what it's going to come.
Exactly.
If you have 3D rendering, then you can go, oh yeah, I know that's what I said, but now that I see it, it's not what I want. And it's much more cost efficient to make a change in a digital model that is out in the field, and that's extra time and money. So the careful pre-planning during the design phase is really critical. Again, making sure that you have all your ducks in a row. So be very specific, like when a contractor is giving their bid, you want to let them know exactly what's going in. So for example, is it going to be a 12-inch by 12-inch tile or a 24 by 12-inch tile? The reason they need to know that, because it affects their labor cost.
Yeah.
It takes more time to put in 12 by 12 tile in a spot than it does by 12 by 24.
Exactly.
So those are the kinds of things that need to be incorporated. So again, it goes back to the details and making sure that the contract, when it's written, captures the scope of work. So you don't want to just say a bathroom remodel on a contract and they sign it. You want to say this brand of cabinets is going to be installed, as an example. If you're going to do paint, it's not just painting. They need to prep and paint. So they have to prepare the surface. So you want to make sure that's included in the cost. It's just those little things that people overlook.
Yeah.
Just the details. So that's on the change order side, on the homeowner.
Yeah.
On the contractor side, it could be that there's a change order because of site conditions. I'll give you an example. So doing an addition, but it was an addition to a garage, and there was an assumption just based on the year that the house was built that the footings for the foundation were 12 inches deep. Okay, but when they dug up the foundation, there were no footings.
Wow. Okay.
So you don't want, an inspector is not going to pass off not putting footings in. So that has to be done. And that's going to be a change order, because that's an increase in the scope of work, and rightfully so.
That has to be done though. Yeah.
Yeah, so rightfully so, but that's because of site conditions. When you are looking at change orders, I highly recommend that you categorize the source of the change. And what you'll see is if homeowners are not doing a lot of the proper pre-planning and their planning is going along, most of them might be generated by the homeowner versus the contractor or the designer. So it just really depends. But again, it's critical to make sure that you are planning before you get started, not planning as you go along during construction.
Awesome. Awesome. I think definitely, like I said, I think this is a great book to get. You said this is not a book that you need to read from start kind of to finish. You said if you do that, you're kind of missing the point. I know in the book you have a couple different almost like worksheets that people can do, but you have a lot of great resources in the book. Just talk a little bit about, okay, so you got the contractor, you went through the process, you did the change orders. Now, what does a successful project at the end look like? What, is it sell it? What happens at the end? What are some of the benefits once somebody gets to the finish line?
Well, let's start at the start line.
Okay.
One of the things that's really successful is people having realistic budgets.
Okay.
So one of the things is when people think of, like, you watch those shows on HGTV and they can do whatever for 50 grand, like this, they did this whole thing for 50 grand, but you don't realize like those aren't real numbers. So don't rely on those reality TV shows to give you real budgets, because they don't. When you think about your budget, it's not just the cost of construction, and that's what people don't realize. They have this budget. I'm going to use 100,000 because it's easy math.
Yep.
But 100,000, you have to back into how much of that you can apportion to the cost of construction. How much would be for costs that you incur before construction starts? Architect, engineer, architect, designer, structural engineer.
Right.
HVAC consultant, Title 24 energy efficiency. Depending on where you live, you might have a soils report, a survey, but those are costs that you have to consider. And you always want to budget a contingency. So, and I would say that for most people, it might be 10 to 15%, but if you are in an older home or a home that has a lot of deferred maintenance, it might be 15 to 20%. But you have to figure that
for the contingency. So
for the contingency, yes.
100,000 on an older house, a 20% contingency is about $20,000. So that means you need to have that much extra for change.
Exactly. So I like to use this formula. I like to use the 20 to 29% rule. So for every $100,000 that you're in hard cost, that's your actual cost of construction, you need to apportion 20 to 29% of that to handle your soft costs, the costs that you incur before construction. So the cost of architect, designer, engineer, soils report if necessary, HVAC consultant, the cost of permitting, because that's not free.
Exactly.
And then you also want to have the contingency of 10 to 15%. So if I'm using $100,000 as my construction cost,
okay,
then 20 to 29% of that for soft costs is going to run you between 20 to 29,000.
Okay.
So that puts you to 120 to 129,000.
Right.
And then you have your 10 to 15% contingency. So that's an additional 10 to 15%. 10 to 15,000.
Right.
So your budget is going to be more like what, 140 on the top range?
Yeah, say 125, 135, anywhere from like 135 to 150.
Right.
So for $100,000 project, you really need about 135 to 150 for anything that can go wrong.
Yes.
And I know this is my last question, but how many projects have you done and seen where nothing was changed?
What do you mean by nothing was changed?
No change orders. Have you ever seen a project that everything?
I have never seen a project that has never had change orders.
Yeah.
Because partly due to site conditions, like the one that I just mentioned. Other times, even though you do the planning, and homeowners, they can change their minds in terms of what they want to put in, and if they're not doing a direct swap in terms of like the size of the tile. Like, I'd rather have something smaller and it doesn't come in a sheet, then that's going to be an increased labor cost. Yeah. Or I'm trying to think of, there was one where a client had a friend come over during construction and made a suggestion, and it actually made sense, and it really made the project better. So there was a change order to take a pantry and turn it into a wine bar off the kitchen.
That's
So
cool.
that wasn't the original scope of work, but it totally made the project better. So
Yeah.
there was cost associated with that.
Awesome. Awesome. We're about 40 minutes in.
Okay.
So if no one, I'm checking the question box. If there's no questions, Monica, just leave us with a final word. And again, please purchase the book. It's a great book. It's a great guide. It has a lot of great information, and it's also very easy to read. And I think it's very digestible. So leave us with any final tips you may have.
Well, the book is written in bite-sized pieces because it can be really overwhelming to take on a project. And I came up with the term remodelitis because I find people are excited about the project, but they're not excited about the project, the process of going through the project.
Okay.
So it helps relieve that because it puts it into manageable bite-sized pieces. And remember that you want it done right away, but in order to get it done as quickly as possible, you're going to have to invest your time to really figure out what it is you want. So the first chapter is all about your vision. And I suggest going through and asking those questions because it helps you get really clear on what it is that you want. I think it was Einstein that had, I think his quote was something to the effect that if you can't explain it clearly, you don't understand it yourself, something to that effect.
Yeah.
You have to have the understanding so that you can communicate to your team because they need to capture the same vision that you have. If not, your project is not going to be what you think it's going to be.
Yeah. Awesome. Monica, we want to thank you so much for your time, for your
thank you for having me.
Yeah, and for your wisdom. Like I said, please go out and purchase the book. And I hope everybody has a very successful next renovation project. Thank you, guys.
That is the goal. The goal is for you to start something that you can finish and be happy with.
And be happy with it. Don't start it if you can't finish it. So thank you all again on this Saturday morning. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day. And Monica, again, thank you as well.
Thank you.
All righty. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.